Hi guys, what's up? My name is David and welcome back to my channel. So this week I want to talk about something that has been irritating me for a while, and it's toxic masculinity, and more specifically toxic masculinity in the modern Viking community, however you'd like to call it. So before I say anything, I want to define what I mean by toxic masculinity and what I mean by modern Viking so that it's clear throughout the entire video. So, toxic masculinity is the first definition from the internet. Of course, the internet is not necessarily a reliable source, but we're going to use that for today. So, toxic masculinity is a term that refers to the harmful aspects of traditional male gender roles. It is characterized by adherence to dominance, devaluation of women, homophobia, and violence. Toxic masculinity stigmatizes and limits the emotions boys and men might comfortably express, and fosters social regression. So, that's that. And well, there is not one clear definition of modern Viking. I guess you can assume what that means. It's someone who lives in the present day, who bases their lives on things that they think are related to the Viking Age and may identify themselves as a Viking or modern Viking. A lot of these people, I use the term people loosely, it's mostly men, because of course there are women in this community, but they are not the problem, let's just say that. But there are a lot of men that use their interest in Vikings or Viking heritage in a way that can be harmful to others. For example, there are groups that use this Viking history, culture, and heritage as a political statement in the sense of this culture being superior to other cultures and using their connection to it to present themselves as better than everyone else. And there's also people who on a personal level like to attack others based on the values that they have that they think come from the Viking Age. As I mentioned in the definition of toxic masculinity, this is usually misogyny, homophobia, violence, which these people assume are linked to the Viking Age. Now, why do they think that? Well, it's because today we have a pretty idealistic, one-sided view of the Viking Age that comes mostly from nationalist movements in the 18th and 19th century in Germany and Scandinavia, and they presented the Vikings as a sort of sauvage noble, so noble savage, who were extremely masculine in the traditional sense of the word, and they plundered, they raped, they hated women, they were violent, things like that. Now, this wasn't necessarily based on any historical evidence. This was just what these people assumed the Vikings had been, and it was fitting into their political agenda that they were trying to build up in times of nationalism. They wanted to present their nations as strong and as warriors, and the Vikings fit in perfectly with that narrative. Of course, it's not only based on just bullshit they made up. In saga literature, which comes from after the Viking Age but is still more relevant to the Viking Age, I guess, there are mentions of typically masculine behavior, how men were supposed to act, and there was a lot of violence, but we cannot assume that these literary works from 200, 300 years after the Viking Age show a true and nuanced view of what life was. They only show us a picture of norms and values after the Viking Age, Christian norms and values. Or they present pagans as brutes, as savages, because they were not Christians. So these modern Vikings see this as a positive thing that they want to live in. They want to be these violent men, show their muscles off, and hate on everyone, especially online. There's tons of people on like Facebook groups that have something to do with the Viking Age, which I'm also part of, and I'm trying to educate people and, make them calm down, things like that. But some people just never learn. And yeah, I just find it kind of disappointing that people believe they should act this way to prove their masculinity, maybe overcompensate for some hidden feelings, because it's really not necessary to act this way. There are a lot of people in this modern Viking community who speak about these social stigmas like men's mental health, queerness, historical inaccuracies that people assume. Here's just two examples of people on social media who are great, and you can check them out if you want to. But still, a lot of people in this community are even identifying themselves with toxic masculinity. They kind of reclaim the term and use it as, oh yeah, I am toxically masculine, which there is a difference between masculinity and toxic masculinity. Masculinity does not have to be toxic. And these gender norms are social constructs anyway. They change according to time and place. And if something was the norm, like now literally 1,000 years ago, it doesn't mean that it still has to be now. We live in a different time. There are different things possible. There are different ways to talk about things, and we shouldn't just copy a culture that has passed and use it now. Of course, it's fun to use history as an inspiration for how you live today. I mean, there's tons of people who do historical reenactment or living history or things like that, but not with a political and especially hateful agenda. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I'm personally also a modern person interested in history. So, I am absolutely not saying that you shouldn't do this, shouldn't identify as a modern Viking or whatever. But just look out for people like this, and if you feel attacked by them, try to respond in a way that will maybe educate them, put them on a better path. Sometimes that just doesn't work, and for your own well being, just do not waste your time on people like that. Let's just leave it at that. So, yeah, I am, of course, speaking of first hand experience being a LGBTQ person in spaces that have a lot of men like this. It doesn't always feel safe, and I think I have the privilege of living in Europe, where I feel the problem is slightly less than in America, for example. Like, there are a lot of these racist or neo-Nazi groups, Viking groups in the US, and there are way less of those in Europe. Because here we know what the Second World War has done to this continent, and well, even though the US was attacked, Pearl Harbor, it hasn't experienced that war as much, so people feel more comfortable identifying themselves with Nazi ideology. But yeah, still, there are a lot of people who go to events that I go to who would not like me to be there. And vice versa, I wouldn't love them to be there because I don't feel safe with them around. So I just hope we'll be able to get to a place where people don't feel the need to hate or discriminate each other based on values that they think people 1,000 years ago had. Alright? Well, I think I've said enough about this. If you have any recommendations for me, what you would like me to talk about, feel free to tell me in the comments, because, I mean, I can just come up with new video ideas, but I will gladly tell you something that you guys would like to know. So, yeah, let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.